The wind hadn't let go of the field when Maggie Dawson stepped out onto the tarmac. Her boots met gravel with a soft crunch, but no one looked up. She wore coveralls faded by time, a clipboard tucked under one arm. Her gloves looped through her belt like a habit she never dropped. The fog clung to the edges of the hangars, dragging a veil across the morning light. Beside a cluster of drones, a group of young officers stood laughing over coffee. One of them nudged the other and said something about maintenance bringing their grandma. Another smirked, not bothering to lower his voice. Maggie didn't flinch. She kept walking, her steps steady, her focus locked ahead. Their laughter faded behind her, but the sting stayed in the air. To them, she was just an old mechanic with no name patch, someone left behind in a world moving too fast. They didn't see her hands, rough and sure, or the worn flight log tucked inside her jacket, like a secret too old to tell. A newer jet flashed in the sunlight, its frame flawless and cold. Maggie passed it without a glance. She moved toward the older birds, the ones no one wanted anymore. Each step she took pushed against something unspoken, something that hung between her and the rest of the base. She didn't need them to believe in her. She just needed the checklist in her hand and the machine that still waited at the edge of the ramp. Maggie Dawson lived on the edge of what most people noticed. In her late 50s, she had the look of someone who never stopped working, who never needed the room to turn her way. Her face carried the sunburn of years in open air, and her shoulders held a quiet strength that no one thought to question. She once flew combat support through valleys so narrow, one wrong tilt would shear the wings off. Her squad ran low-altitude missions across jungle corridors and desert heat. No comms, no backup. But none of that was written on her uniform now. What she wore didn't matter anymore. Her coveralls were clean but worn thin at the cuffs. Her boots had soles patched twice, and her jacket smelled faintly of engine oil and old canvas. Maggie didn't talk about the years she flew without identifiers, call signs changing each mission. She didn't mention the day her team was disbanded with no notice, just a printed list on a door. She'd found her name at the bottom, next to a line that said, "Reserve Inventory Command." They didn't revoke her flight clearance. They just never renewed it. So she stopped asking and started showing up. Every morning before the power units kicked in, before the frost burned off the ramp. She slept behind stacked crates in a forgotten corner of the maintenance hangar. Her cot was tucked between a hydraulic jack and a rusted avionics box. Her jacket folded at the foot, thermos beside it, notepad worn soft at the corners. She lived like the aircraft she cared for, outdated, overlooked, but never broken. No one asked why she stayed. Maybe they assumed she had nowhere else to go. Maybe they thought she didn't know how to leave. But Maggie knew. She stayed because the old birds still spoke to her in ways the new machines never could. She felt the heat curve in the engine block, knew what frost on the casing meant, could tell from a hum whether a system would hold through a turn. She didn't take notes to be seen. She logged because the machines deserved it, because she still believed in flight, even if the world had stopped believing in her. The young officers barely glanced her way. They stepped around her when she walked the ramp, didn't invite her to the mess, didn't ask for her take on diagnostics. To them, she was just the woman in the corner with grease on her sleeves. But she didn't mind. She didn't need attention. She needed purpose. Maggie had learned a long time ago that skill doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right moment to matter again. Every morning she checked the A-10s without instruction. She traced the pressure lines, tightened seals, recalibrated trims. Not because she was told to, but because she knew what might be asked of them one day. She didn't wear a name patch anymore, but her name was still stitched into the frame of every aircraft she kept alive, just not where anyone else could see. She carried a flight log that never made it into official records, pages filled with hand-drawn terrain reads, mission notes, temperature margins written from memory. Some pages were faded, others torn and patched with cloth tape. When she flipped through it at night, sitting cross-legged beside her cot, she didn't think of what she'd lost. She thought of what she'd done, of the silence inside a cockpit when the world depended on you and nothing could afford to go wrong. She didn't fly anymore, but in every way that mattered, she never stopped flying. The aircraft remembered her hands. The tools still moved the way they did when she was 20 years younger. Nothing about her was obsolete, except the system that forgot how to count people like her. Maggie didn't need to be thanked. She just needed the engines to turn when it counted. She needed the old birds to keep their breath. And they did, because she never left. The main flight line of the base looked like a showroom. Rows of sleek, unmanned aircraft sat under bright halogen lights, their silver frames sharp against the smooth tarmac. Tech officers in fitted uniforms walked between them, eyes fixed on tablets, voices low and clipped through headsets. Every system buzzed with automation. Drones lifted without pilots, guided by satellite lines and algorithm loops. The hangars nearest the command tent were spotless, the air inside them filtered and dry. Even the tool carts gleamed, wires coiled in color-coded bins, every surface labeled with QR tags. Diagnostics ran without human touch, and the newest recruits were trained more in code than in torque. But, farther down the line, the air changed. Past Bay 6, the lighting dimmed and the pavement cracked. A stretch of silence separated the polished jets from what lay beyond. Maggie's hangar didn't have a number on the door. The paint had worn off years ago. A curtain of thick plastic hung across the entrance, edges curled from time and heat. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old fuel. The floor was stained with oil patches no one had tried to scrub. Toolboxes were mismatched, paint chipped, drawers crooked from years of opening without care. Against the far wall stood the A-10 Thunderbolt II. It didn't shine. Its frame bore the marks of use, not neglect. Chips in the paint, dents from brush landings. The gray faded into a muted blue. The walls around it were lined with crates and salvaged parts. Some were labeled, some not. A fan in the corner creaked whenever the wind hit it right. There was no central heating. Maggie used a dented kettle to boil water and tucked her cot beside a stack of flight panels. A tarp draped across the side for privacy, though no one ever came close enough to peer in. This part of the base didn't hum. It breathed, slow and steady, like the aircraft it held. No one sent orders to this end. Maggie wrote her own schedules, kept her own logs. She tracked battery levels and heat retention by hand. It was quiet. Not the cold kind of quiet that came from emptiness, but the full kind that came from being overlooked, like a room closed off from noise but not from meaning. The officers who passed by didn't see value here. They saw waste, equipment too old to upgrade, space too cluttered to impress. But Maggie saw a different kind of order. She knew which wires were good, which cables still had bite. She could reach for a fuse in the dark and get it right on the first try. She worked without ceremony. Her clipboard had no stickers, her logs no color codes, but every page told a truth the new systems missed. The base ran on data. Maggie ran on feel. To most, the A-10 was a relic, heavy, slow, analog, unfit for modern war. But to Maggie, it was the last thing on that field that still answered to hands. Not programming, not protocol, just instinct. Her hangar didn't glow. It didn't broadcast progress or innovation, but it held the kind of knowledge you couldn't download. And in the dark, surrounded by dust and quiet, Maggie kept showing up, not to prove a point, but because she knew something the rest of the base had forgotten. Some tools still needed to be held. Some aircraft still needed to be felt. Some jobs still needed people who remembered how to listen. The alert came before sunrise. A recon team had gone dark past the Echo Ridge, caught in a sudden fog bank that shut down every eye in the sky. No drones could map it. No cameras could punch through the cloud floor. By the time the command tent filled, the air was tight with tension. Screens flashed red across half the boards. Everyone talked at once, trying to solve a problem that had no clear shape. The valley was steep, narrow, layered with trees and rock. GPS was unreliable, and visibility dropped to 0 under 1,000 feet. The only working drone clipped a pine line and went black before it cleared the first rise. Someone suggested flare-bots, but the terrain was too tight for safe drop. The wind shear off the ridgeline twisted air patterns into chaos. Even the smaller aircraft couldn't hold steady long enough to mark the evac zone. Every option failed before it finished being explained. The commander's voice cut through the chatter, calling for altitudes, coordinates, line of sight. The answers all came back wrong. They had no way in, no way to mark the team. No way to confirm if they were still alive. One young lieutenant slammed a tablet shut. He said what no one wanted to hear. There's nothing small enough to fly that low and stay under the cloud. A silence followed, stretched and brittle. Radios kept hissing in the background, none of them bringing news. Someone else offered to delay the evac and go overland, but time was bleeding fast, and the slope beneath the team had already shifted once. One more break, and they'd go with it. No one said the word, but they were circling failure. Every second they waited made it worse. Every idea hit the same wall. Outside the tent, Maggie stood by the edge of the canvas. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her gloves were looped through her belt. A strip of wiring tape sat in her hand, but she wasn't fixing anything. She had heard everything, and like the others, she knew the valley. She had flown it before, not with instruments, not with digital maps, just terrain, gut, and a machine she trusted with her life. But no one inside the tent knew that. No one looked her way. And the only aircraft that could fly under those clouds was sitting untouched in the cold behind Hangar 5. Maggie stood beside the A-10, her eyes on the frost that had settled over the frame. Most of the jets nearby were covered in white. This one had streaks of melt tracing along the intake panel. She placed her gloved hand on the metal. It was warmer than ambient. Not hot, not active, but recently alive. Someone had run the system or checked power, maybe without logging it. Or maybe the plane had just been holding a memory. Either way, Maggie knew what it meant. She crouched low and pulled back the access panel near the auxiliary intake. A short diagnostic cable clicked into place with no resistance. Her compact reader blinked once, then lit up green. Residual voltage? Not much, but enough to hold memory. Enough to tell her the bus was intact and the throttle housing hadn't frozen. The seals were clean. She checked them twice. No frost bloom inside the frame, no drag along the trim. It could fly. Not long, not fast, but it could fly. She stepped back, letting her eyes pass over the body of the aircraft. She didn't look for dents or faded paint. She looked for what mattered. The line of the wings, the tension in the flaps, the way the casing settled after the last adjustment. She knew this machine better than anyone on base. She had flown its kind in worse weather, through tighter corners, with fewer tools to guide her. It wasn't theory. It was memory. But no one had asked her. No one had even noticed she was gone from the tent. They were still arguing over specs and maps, still waiting for a solution that fit the manual. She pressed her palm flat against the engine block one more time. The metal was cold again, but not dead. It had waited, just like she had. And now, it was ready. Behind her, the generators kicked on again. Another drone calibration run. More systems running nowhere. Maggie folded the diagnostic sheet, slipped it under her coat, and walked toward the edge of the ramp. No one stopped her. No one knew what she had just confirmed. And no one believed the answer was standing right in front of them. Maggie used to fly so low she could see the shape of a child's kite snagged in the treetops. Her aircraft moved like breath through jungle heat, wings cutting between hills and smoke. There were no lights, no chatter, just the sound of her own heartbeat. And the engine, she trusted more than anything. She didn't need maps. She read terrain like memory, remembered the pull of wind against steel, the way valleys narrowed when storms came fast. Every mission was drawn by hand afterward, marked in ink on the same logbook she still carried. She flew without praise. Her call sign changed every time. There was no ceremony when she landed, no medals waiting at the gate. She walked straight from the tarmac to debrief, handed in notes no one read, and came back the next day. When the squadron dissolved, there was no goodbye. Just a list on the wall and a name moved from active to standby. It didn't matter. Maggie showed up anyway. She traded flight hours for maintenance shifts, training sessions for tool checks. No one told her to, but the machines still needed hands. The old birds didn't know they were forgotten. She felt it in her bones when one wasn't balanced, heard it in the hum when a seal needed tuning. These things weren't technical. They were personal. The new systems ran on data. Maggie ran on feel. Her notes didn't match the forms, so they were filed and ignored. Still, she wrote them down. Her world shrank to one hangar, 2 toolkits, and a cot behind a stack of crates. That was enough. She didn't come for the space. She came for the work. People asked why she never transferred out. Truth was, she didn't want to start over. Not because she was afraid, because she already knew what mattered most was here. The A-10s reminded her of herself. Rugged, plain, built for function over flash. They weren't graceful, but they survived. She never asked to be counted. She just kept count of what needed doing, and did it. Some days, she missed the sky. The feel of air thinning as she climbed, the resistance on the stick when she dipped under clouds. But mostly, she missed the clarity. Up there, you either made it or you didn't. No gray zones. No debates. Down here, things were softer, slower, but the stakes were the same. If she missed a pressure line or forgot a weld, something could fail when it mattered most. So she stayed. Not for recognition, not out of habit, but because she believed in the machines, believed in the people who'd have to fly them next. Her body ached more now, knees stiff in the cold, fingers sore by sunset, but her hands still knew what torque felt like. Her ears still caught shifts in vibration others missed. No one thanked her. That was fine. She wasn't doing it for thanks. She did it because every once in a while, something would hum just right, and she'd know it was ready for whatever came next. That's why she never left. Because when no one else saw it coming, she would. When no one else stepped forward, she could. And when everything depended on someone showing up, she always had. The command tent was thick with heat and static when Maggie stepped inside. Her jacket was zipped to the collar, gloves hooked through one hand, and a folded diagram clutched in the other. No one noticed her at first. She didn't speak right away. She walked to the edge of the planning table and laid the diagram flat, smoothing the paper with steady fingers. A young lieutenant looked up and blinked like he wasn't sure what he was seeing. Another officer frowned and glanced toward the door as if expecting someone else to follow. Maggie didn't wait. She tapped the section of the map that showed the valley's topography. Then she said the words no one else had dared. The A-10 on Pad 5 is functional. The systems respond. It can fly. The room shifted. A captain with clean boots and a 2-white collar shook his head. He said that airframe wasn't cleared, hadn't passed live inspection. Maggie met his eye and said she'd done the last inspection herself. Someone muttered that she wasn't on the roster. Maggie pulled a folded envelope from her pocket and placed it beside the map. It was a provisional clearance form. Signed, never filed, but valid. The commander stepped closer, arms folded, face unreadable. He asked if she was seriously suggesting a flare drop in that plane, flown by someone without hours logged in years. Maggie didn't flinch. She said she wasn't suggesting. She was stating a fact. The plane could fly, and she could fly it. Another voice, younger, tried to cut her off. He said it didn't have autonomous nav or targeting. She said she didn't need it. She had flown that valley before. No sensors, no aids, just eyes and instinct. The room went still. No one laughed. No one spoke. Then, from the back, a senior mechanic stepped forward and said he'd seen her run diagnostics every morning. Said no one asked her to. She just did it. And did it right. The commander rubbed his temple and looked down at the map. He said they had nothing else. No aircraft small enough. No pilots who knew the valley. Maggie stood quiet as he reached for the clearance tag on the table. One-time assist. No backup. She'd have to log her own flight, file her own return. No guarantees. Maggie nodded once. She didn't thank him. She picked up the tag, folded the map, and turned toward the door. No one stopped her. Not this time. Maggie moved across the ramp without hurry. The clearance tag swung from her fingers. A few heads turned as she passed, but no one said a word. The A-10 waited where it always had, its paint chipped, the flare rig strapped behind the cockpit like it was part of its skin. The wind tugged at the edge of a maintenance tarp, flapping once and then falling still. She climbed the ladder in 3 clean steps. Her hands knew every rung, Inside, the harness straps slid across her chest like they remembered her. The cockpit smelled of metal and time. She adjusted the seat, clicked each buckle into place, and ran her fingers over the panel. Systems responded in slow, steady rhythm. She whispered the checks aloud to herself, not for procedure, for rhythm, the kind that steadied her breath and brought her back to center. Outside, the crew stood in silence. One technician took a half step forward, then stopped. He saw the tag in her hand and looked away. Maggie powered the systems one by one. The hum built slow and low, not smooth, not slick, but strong. The engine caught with a rumble that rolled across the ramp. No one clapped. No one needed to. They all felt it. The aircraft rolled forward like it had been waiting for this day, its wheels heavy on the concrete, its body shifting against the wind. It wasn't fast, but it was certain. Maggie eased the throttle with a hand that didn't shake. The yoke moved under her palm with the weight of something real. Not simulated, not automated, alive. The sky was low and gray. The clouds pressed tight against the ridge. She didn't look up. She looked ahead. The A-10 lifted slow, not graceful, not easy, but sure. It rose into the air like a story being told in a language no one had spoken in years. The old machine groaned once, then steadied. Maggie's eyes stayed fixed on the line between sky and earth. Back on the ground, no one moved, not because they were ordered, because they understood. The aircraft disappeared into the fog, and the woman they had overlooked became the only one flying. The wind hit her side before she cleared the ridge. Maggie adjusted with a small tilt, barely a shift in pressure on the yoke. The plane responded like it remembered her hands. Below, the fog was thick, rising in curls over the valley floor. Visibility dropped the second she dipped below 500 feet. Everything outside the canopy turned gray. She didn't flinch. She eased the throttle and let the weight of the plane cut through the mist. Her eyes scanned for gaps, for movement, for any line that matched the map she still carried in her head. A sharp gust shoved the left wing up by 2 degrees. Maggie rolled slightly to even it. No overcorrection, just trust in the shape of the air. The cockpit trembled as another draft caught the undercarriage. She leaned into the wind without panic. That kind of turbulence didn't scare her. It reminded her she was flying something real. She dropped to 400 feet. Trees appeared and vanished like ghosts beneath her. The terrain shifted, jagged on one side, falling steep on the other. The last recon ping had landed just past a bent ridgeline with a broken treetop. Maggie looked for it, letting instinct take over where tech had failed. Her left hand gripped the flare trigger, her right balanced the nose. The sky pressed close, the clouds dragged across her view like wet cloth. Still, she kept the line. Still, she knew the way. There, a gap, a flash of orange below. She couldn't see bodies, but she saw movement. That was enough. She didn't speak into the radio. She didn't call for confirmation. She just pulled the trigger. The flare dropped fast and true, slicing through the mist in a streak of red. It hit the slope, bounced once, and lit up like fire in fog. Maggie didn't wait to watch. She banked hard to the left, letting the aircraft roll low and wide to hold her arc. The wings groaned but didn't complain. She turned the nose back toward base, climbing slow to clear the return path. Her breath was steady, her hands calm. Behind her, the flare still burned. On the ground, shapes moved. 3, maybe 4. They waved, barely visible, but alive. The A-10 shuddered as it hit the leading edge of an updraft. Maggie let it ride the curve. She didn't fight the lift. She knew the rhythm. Her eyes flicked across the console. Everything held. Fuel, pressure, trim. The old bird had done what no system could. She leveled out just above the ridge. The clouds swallowed her trail within seconds. No one behind her would see the path she took. She didn't care. It wasn't for them. It was for the ones on the ground and for the plane that trusted her back. The return was quiet. No orders. No chatter. Just the hum of an engine built for endurance and a woman who remembered how to make it sing. Maggie didn't look back at the valley. She didn't need to. The job was done. and she was still flying. The A-10 touched down without drama. Its wheels kissed the tarmac in a rhythm that spoke of skill, not speed. No escort met her. No fanfare waited at the edge of the ramp. Maggie eased the brakes in slow pulses, guiding the aircraft back to its place near the outer hangars. The sky had cleared slightly, just enough to soften the light across the field. She powered down each system with care, one switch at a time. The engine faded into silence. She unbuckled, climbed down, and landed with the same solid step she always had. One of the junior crew stared as she passed, but didn't speak. She set the flare pouch on the ground beside the landing gear. Scuffed, empty, job done. No one told her where to go. She didn't ask. From the tent, a few officers stepped out, the commander among them. He looked at the A-10, then at Maggie, his face unreadable. He didn't raise his voice. He just nodded and said the tag was pulled. The aircraft would stay in active inventory. Maggie said nothing. She reached into her jacket and took out her logbook. Worn, faded, pages loose at the spine. She opened it to a flight she had logged years ago and handed it over. The commander took it and flipped through slowly. Maps, coordinates, diagrams no one else had drawn. When he gave it back, he didn't question any of it. He just said they were real. Maggie nodded once and turned toward the hangar. Her steps were steady, the same as they'd always been. But now, no one looked through her. They watched her pass, not with doubt, with something closer to understanding. She didn't smile, didn't stop, just disappeared behind the old plastic curtain like she'd never left it. Only this time, they all knew. She never really had. In a world that chases spotlight and titles, Maggie Dawson reminds us there is another kind of strength. The kind that shows up without being asked. The kind that waits patiently until it's needed most. She didn't need applause. She didn't ask to be seen. She just did the job because it mattered. Her hands knew the work. Her heart never left the mission. And when the moment came, she was ready, not for attention, but for action. There are heroes who speak loudly, and there are heroes who move quietly through the corners we overlook. Maggie was never forgotten by the aircraft she cared for, and now, she won't be forgotten by us. If her story stayed with you, let someone else hear it too. Maybe they need the reminder that real value doesn't fade. It just waits for the right time to rise.